I'd always considered myself a hunter of rare finds. When you grow up with everything handed to you on silver platters, you learn to value the things you discover on your own. That's why secondhand bookstores were my secret addiction. The one on Maple Avenue in Chandler was my favorite. Authentic, dusty, and far from my usual socialite crowd. The moment I spotted Midnight in Manhattan on the corner shelf, I knew I had to have it. First edition, slightly tattered spine, that unmistakable old book smell. I reached for it just as another hand appeared from nowhere. Sorry, I was just about to grab that. The voice belonged to a woman with chestnut brown hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Funny, so was I. I didn't pull my hand back, neither did she. We stood there, two grown women having a silent standoff over a book. Her eyes were the most arresting shade of blue I'd ever seen, the kind flight crews must see when they break through storm clouds into clear sky. Speaking of which, flight attendant? I asked, noticing her crisp uniform beneath an open jacket. Socialite? She countered, eyeing my cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. I couldn't help but laugh. Is it that obvious? The watch gave you away. She nodded toward my wrist. Ruby Phillips, right? I've seen you in Chandler Magazine's society pages. And you are? Melanie Turner. I fly the rich and famous around the world but never get my picture in magazines. Neither of us had let go of the book. How about we solve this civilized, I suggested. Coffee next door, and whoever makes the best case for why they need this book gets it? 15 minutes later, we were sitting by the window of the Daily Grind. Melanie had changed her heels for flats, but otherwise still looked impeccably put together despite coming off a red-eye flight. So why this book? I asked, sipping my overpriced latte. My grandmother loved the author. She used to read his books to me when I was little. This is the only one missing from my collection. Her fingers traced the cover edge lovingly. Your turn. I've got nothing that sentimental, I admitted. I just love finding books that aren't mass-market copies. There's something about knowing someone else has turned these pages before you. When she smiled, my attention fixated on her lips. They were full, slicked with just a hint of gloss, moving expressively as she spoke about literature and her travels. I caught myself leaning forward, drawn in by her animated descriptions of reading in airport lounges across different time zones. Tell you what, Melanie finally said. Why don't we share it? You read it first, then pass it to me when you're done? That requires a certain amount of trust, I said, surprised by my reluctance to end our conversation. How do I know you won't fly off to Tokyo with my contact information? You'll just have to risk it, won't you? She pulled out her phone. Besides, now I have something the great Ruby Phillips wants. That's social currency right there. As we exchanged numbers, our fingers brushed again. This time, without the book between us, I felt a distinct tingle that traveled up my arm. When we said goodbye outside the coffee shop, I found myself inventing reasons to prolong the moment. Safe flights, Melanie Turner, I finally said, backing away reluctantly. Happy reading, Ruby Phillips, she replied with a knowing smile. Walking back to my car, I realized I was clutching the book against my chest like a schoolgirl. Whatever just happened in that bookstore and coffee shop wasn't just about literature. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I'd felt that rush of meeting someone who saw past my designer clothes and family name. I already knew I'd be calling her long before I finished that book. My penthouse felt emptier than usual that evening. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered the same breathtaking view of downtown Chandler I'd admired 1,000 times before, but tonight I barely noticed it. The socialite in me was busy preparing for the Prescott Foundation Gala, the event of the season, yet I couldn't stop thinking about a certain flight attendant and her captivating blue eyes. Ridiculous, I muttered, laying out 3 designer dresses on my king-sized bed. I had texting threads with half of Chandler's elite waiting for responses, financial portfolios to review, and charity board decisions to make. I didn't have time to fixate on a chance meeting with a woman who probably met hundreds of interesting people every week. The intercom buzzed. My personal shopper had arrived with the jewelry options for tomorrow's gala. I spent the next hour discussing diamond settings and pearl arrangements, all while that damn used book sat on my nightstand, taunting me. Later, soaking in my marble tub with a glass of Cabernet, I finally gave in and opened Midnight in Manhattan. Inside the front cover was a business card, Melanie Turner, with her phone number scrawled beneath an airline logo. She must have slipped it in while I wasn't looking. Clever. I found myself smiling at her boldness. Most people in my world approached with careful calculation. Every interaction measured for potential advantage. Melanie had simply seen something, or someone, she wanted and reached for it. My finger hovered over her number, but pride held me back. I rarely made the first move in anything. 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, Melanie Turner handed a glass of champagne to the passenger in 2A. "Thank you, dear," the elderly woman said. "How much longer until London?" "About 4 hours," Melanie replied, adjusting the woman's blanket with practiced ease. "Can I bring you anything else?" The mundane routine of first-class service usually centered her, but tonight her mind kept drifting back to Chandler, to a bookstore, to a pair of piercing green eyes belonging to a woman who probably didn't give her a second thought after their encounter. Ruby Phillips. Even her name sounded expensive. With her golden blonde hair arranged in effortless waves and that subtle perfume that probably cost more than Melanie's rent. In her decade of flying, Melanie had served countless celebrities and billionaires, but something about Ruby felt different, less manufactured, despite her obvious wealth. There had been genuine interest in her eyes during their conversation, not the dismissive glance flight attendants typically received from the wealthy. During her break, Melanie checked her phone, scrolling through notifications. No messages from unknown numbers. Why would there be? Ruby Phillips probably had an assistant to read books to her. "You look disappointed," her coworker Tara remarked, collapsing into the jump seat beside her. "Bad news from home?" "No news at all." Melanie pocketed her phone, just wondering if someone found my card. "Mysterious," Tara teased. "Anyone I know?" "Just someone I met at a bookstore." Melanie busied herself with restocking napkins. "We're sharing a book." "Sharing a book? Is that what they call it now?" Melanie rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. "It's not like that." But what was it like? The memory of Ruby's fingers brushing against hers lingered like a pleasant static charge, the way she'd leaned forward while Melanie spoke, genuinely listening. The slight hesitation before they'd parted ways. By the time they landed at Heathrow, Melanie had convinced herself the entire encounter meant nothing. Ruby Phillips inhabited a world of galas and champagne brunches. Melanie lived out of a suitcase, sleeping in different time zones, serving people like Ruby. Still, as she checked into her crew hotel, she found herself wondering which page Ruby had reached in their shared book, and whether she occasionally thought about their unexpected meeting too. 3 days later, I was deep into midnight in Manhattan when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "I'm on chapter 7 and can't stop thinking about the doorman's backstory. Have you gotten there yet?" I smiled, something warm spreading through my chest as I typed back. "Finished it last night. The doorman isn't what he seems. When do you return to Chandler?" Her response came quickly, "Tomorrow afternoon." I hesitated only briefly before typing, "Chandler Botanical Gardens, 2 p.m. Thursday? I hear the spring blooms are spectacular." "It's a date," she replied, adding, figuratively speaking. I set down my phone, wondering why those 3 simple words made my heart beat faster than any charity auction or society event had in years. The Chandler Botanical Gardens were showing off that day. April sunshine filtered through cherry blossoms, creating dappled patterns on the stone pathways. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, anxiously checking my reflection in a decorative pond. Why was I nervous? This wasn't a date, just 2 acquaintances discussing literature. I spotted Melanie before she saw me. She was wearing jeans and a simple white blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, so different from her uniform but somehow even more striking. When she noticed me, her face lit up with a genuine smile that made something flutter in my chest. "I brought the book," I said, holding it up like some kind of shield. "And I brought lunch." She revealed a small picnic basket. "Nothing fancy, just some sandwiches and iced tea. I thought we could eat while we talk." We found a secluded bench beneath a flowering magnolia tree. As we spread out the simple lunch, I became acutely aware of how different this was from my usual carefully orchestrated social engagements. "So, tell me how someone becomes Ruby Phillips," Melanie said, handing me a sandwich wrapped in brown paper. "Born with a silver spoon, I'm guessing?" "Platinum," I corrected with a self-deprecating smile. "My great-grandfather started Phillips Industries. I'm the 4th-generation disappointment who prefers books to boardrooms. Somehow I doubt anyone considers you a disappointment." I laughed. "You haven't met my family." As we ate, I found myself telling her things I rarely shared. How I'd established a literacy foundation using my trust fund, my secret passion for poetry, my occasional desire to disappear from Chandler's suffocating social scene. "What about you?" I asked. "How does someone decide to spend their life in perpetual jet lag?" Melanie's eyes traveled upward to follow the path of a butterfly. "My dad was military. We moved every couple of years. I guess constant motion just feels like home." She took a sip of tea. "Plus, I love seeing people's faces when they're going somewhere new. All that anticipation and possibility. Must be nice," I mused, "having the world as your office." "It can be lonely," she admitted. "Lots of connections, not many relationships." Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. For a perfect moment, the garden around us seemed to fade away. Our botanical garden meeting turned into dinner the following week. Then breakfast after her red-eye flight from Paris. Soon we were texting daily, me sending her photos of Chandler's changing seasons, her replying with snapshots from Tokyo, London, Dubai. The time differences meant we often spoke late at night for me, early morning for her. I found myself rushing home from events to call her, curling up in my window seat overlooking the city lights as she described Norwegian fjords or Australian sunrises. "You should come with me sometime," she said during one such call. "First class has its perks." "Would you still serve me champagne?" I teased. "I'd even give you an extra bag of pretzels." We both laughed, and I realized how much I'd come to crave the sound of her voice. 3 months after our bookstore meeting, I invited Melanie to a small dinner party at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just a few friends who wouldn't judge her for not knowing which fork to use for the fish course. She arrived wearing a simple black dress that made her blue eyes even more vivid. I introduced her as my friend from the bookstore, watching with amusement as my socialite friends tried to place her in our hierarchy. The evening flowed better than I'd expected. Melanie charmed everyone with stories of celebrity passengers and exotic destinations. She belonged everywhere, I realized, a chameleon comfortable in any environment. As the last guests departed around midnight, we found ourselves alone in my kitchen, loading the dishwasher, an activity my housekeeper would have been horrified to witness. "Your friends are nicer than I expected," Melanie said, handing me a crystal wine glass. "They're on their best behavior. You're new and interesting." "And what happens when I'm not new anymore?" The question hung between us, layered with meaning. What was this friendship becoming? Why did my apartment suddenly feel more like home with her in it? When we finished cleaning, I walked her to the door. Our goodbye hug felt different this time, longer, closer. I could smell the faint jasmine of her perfume, feel the warmth of her body against mine. When we pulled apart, our faces remained inches from each other, her eyes dropping briefly to my lips. For one breathless moment, I thought she might kiss me. Instead, she stepped back, her smile trembling slightly at the edges. "Thanks for tonight," she whispered. After she left, I stood at my window watching her car drive away, wondering why my apartment suddenly felt so empty and why my heart was beating like I'd run a marathon. Autumn arrived, painting Chandler in amber and gold. Melanie had been staying over more frequently. Nothing had happened between us, but we'd grown comfortable sharing space. This morning, she sat at my kitchen island in borrowed silk pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, scrolling through news on her tablet while I made coffee. "Want the arts section?" I asked, sliding the physical newspaper toward her. I still preferred print to pixels. "Thanks." She took it with a smile that made my stomach flip. "I've got 3 days before my next flight. Any plans to entertain me?" Before I could answer, her expression changed. She was staring at something in the newspaper, her face suddenly pale. "Mel? What is it?" She turned the page toward me, pointing to a small obituary. "James Harrison," she read aloud. "Age 62, passed unexpectedly in his sleep. Memorial service Thursday at St. Joseph's Chapel." "Do you know him?" I asked, puzzled by her reaction. "I think so. He was a regular in first class on my Atlantic routes." She frowned. Friendly older gentleman with salt and pepper hair and horn-rimmed glasses. Always ordered tomato juice, never alcohol. We had the most fascinating conversations. I peered at the grainy photo accompanying the obituary. Something about the face seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. Weird coincidence. "He mentioned Chandler once," Melanie continued. "Said he had connections here but never elaborated." We might have left it at that. a moment of silence for someone tangentially connected to Melanie's work life, except for what happened next. As I reached to refill her coffee mug, a strange sensation swept over me. A memory fragment, the same man, sitting across from me at a charity fundraiser, asking pointed questions about my literacy foundation. Wait, I said slowly. I think I met him too. At a Phillips Foundation event last year. He made a sizable donation. Melanie's eyes widened. That can't be coincidence. We spent the next hour piecing together our separate encounters with James Harrison. The man had apparently told Melanie stories about growing up in New England, while he'd told me about his development projects in South America, two completely different narratives to two women who, at the time, were strangers to each other. This is bizarre, I said finally. Why would he create different personas? Melanie stared at the obituary again. I don't know, but I feel like I should pay my respects. You want to go to the funeral? I asked, surprised. Don't you think it's strange that we both knew him, that he knew us, before we even met each other? She had a point. The coincidence felt significant somehow, like a thread connecting dots I couldn't yet see. I'll go with you, I decided. Thursday morning, right? 2 days later, we arrived at St. Joseph's Chapel dressed in somber black. The rain matched the occasion, falling in a steady drizzle that beaded on our umbrellas. We slipped into the back row, feeling like imposters among the sparse crowd of mourners. The service was brief, readings a hymn, reflections from someone identified as Harrison's attorney. No family members spoke. I scanned the attendees, wondering if anyone else had stories similar to ours. When the eulogy began, the attorney painted a picture of a private man who had traveled extensively, invested wisely, and maintained few close relationships. James valued connection above all else, the man said. Though not blessed with family of his own, he found meaning in the lives he touched through his philanthropy and travels. Beside me, Melanie tensed. I followed her gaze to a display board near the altar, a collage of photos spanning Harrison's life. In one corner was a picture of him shaking hands with me at the foundation gala. In another, he was smiling beside Melanie in what appeared to be an airport lounge. Ruby, she whispered, clutching my arm. What the hell? My heart pounded. This wasn't just coincidence. Harrison had known us both and for whatever reason, had wanted us to see these connections after his death. As the service concluded, we remained frozen in our seats, watching as the small gathering of mourners dispersed. When most had left, the attorney who delivered the eulogy approached us. Ms. Phillips, Ms. Turner, he said with a nod. I'm Robert Coleman. James mentioned you might attend. He knew we'd come? I asked, stunned. Coleman smiled cryptically. James had a gift for anticipating connections. He asked me to give you this if you appeared together. He handed me a sealed envelope with both our names written on it, then excused himself to speak with other guests. Melanie and I stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid of what it might contain. Should we open it here? She asked. I shook my head. Let's go back to my place. As we drove through the rainy streets of Chandler, the envelope sat between us like a living thing, a mystery neither of us was quite ready to unravel. Back in my apartment, rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. I poured us each 2 fingers of whiskey, my grandfather's expensive scotch that I saved for momentous occasions. This certainly qualified. You open it, Melanie said, pushing the envelope toward me across the kitchen island. Her fingers trembled slightly. I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. Dear Ruby and Melanie. I read aloud. If you're reading this, then 2 things have happened. I've left this world, and you two have found each other. Neither circumstance should cause sadness. Melanie took a long sip of whiskey, her eyes never leaving my face as I continued reading. You're wondering how I knew you would meet. The truth is I didn't, not with certainty. But I've spent my life studying connections, the invisible threads that pull certain souls toward each other. Some call it fate. I call it pattern recognition. This is creepy, Melanie murmured. Ruby, your passion for literacy and authentic connection despite your privileged isolation drew my attention years ago. Melanie, your ability to form meaningful bonds within fleeting interactions showed me a similar spirit. When I realized you both frequented Maple Avenue Books, I paused, feeling slightly dizzy. He set us up? At the bookstore? That's impossible, Melanie said. I only went there because my flight was delayed and I had unexpected time in Chandler. Which he could have known if he monitored flight patterns, I reasoned, continuing to read. I simply created conditions for possibility. The connection you formed was entirely your own doing. I've spent my life connecting people who might otherwise miss each other. It's been my quiet purpose. The letter ended with a postscript. The attorney will have another letter for you in 1 month's time. Until then, examine what you've discovered in each other that you couldn't find elsewhere. We sat in stunned silence, the whiskey burning pleasantly in my throat. Do you believe any of this? Melanie finally asked. I don't know what to believe. I folded the letter carefully, except that I'm glad we met, however it happened. Our eyes locked. Something had shifted between us, the strange revelation creating an intimacy that wasn't there before. We were linked now by this bizarre shared experience. How much do you think he knew about us? Melanie whispered, moving around the island to stand beside me. The scent of her perfume mingled with the peaty aroma of scotch. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm more interested in what we don't know about each other. She was close now, close enough that I could see the flecks of darker blue in her irises, the slight unevenness of her breathing. What don't you know about me, Ruby Phillips? Her voice was barely audible. I don't know if you're thinking what I'm thinking right now, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. The apartment felt charged with electricity as Melanie reached up to touch my face. Her fingertips traced my cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I've been waiting for this moment since you reached for that damn book. The storm outside mirrored the one breaking inside me as her lips finally met mine. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning, then deepening with certainty. My hands found her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space between us. We moved to the living room, illuminated only by the city lights filtering through rain-streaked windows. Somewhere between kisses, whispered confessions spilled out. How long we'd wanted this, how afraid we'd been to ruin our friendship, how difficult it was to name this feeling growing between us. Melanie's careful hands unbuttoned my blouse with reverent slowness, her lips following the path her fingers created. I tangled my hands in her hair, gasping as she discovered sensitive places I'd forgotten existed. When my fingers slipped beneath the hem of her sweater, her skin was warm velvet beneath my touch. Time suspended as we explored each other, learning new topographies by candlelight. Our bodies moved together with increasing urgency, whispered guidance giving way to breathless pleas. I memorized the curve of her spine, the sound she made when I touched her just right, the way her name tasted on my tongue. We finally collapsed against the plush rug, limbs intertwined, breath gradually steadying. Rain continued its rhythm against the windows, a natural soundtrack to our transformed relationship. So, Melanie murmured against my shoulder, I guess we should thank James Harrison. I laughed, tucking her closer against me. For meddling in our lives? For having good taste in matchmaking? As she drifted to sleep in my arms, I stared at the ceiling, wondering about the man who had somehow seen what we needed before we knew it ourselves. Outside, the storm was passing, stars beginning to peek through broken clouds. Whatever James Harrison's next letter might reveal, I was certain of one thing. My life had irreversibly changed course, like a plane diverting to an unexpected but far more promising destination. I woke before Melanie the next morning, sunlight replacing last night's storm. She slept peacefully beside me, her breathing deep and regular. The weight of what had happened settled over me. Not regret exactly, but a sudden, overwhelming awareness of complications. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from Vanessa Coleman, chair of the Chandler Arts Foundation. Damn. The emergency board meeting I'd completely forgotten about. Carefully extracting myself from Melanie's embrace, I texted Vanessa a flimsy excuse about food poisoning. Then I quickly wrote a note claiming the same illness might be contagious, and I didn't want to risk Melanie getting sick. I left it propped against the coffee pot where she'd be sure to find it. Coward, a voice in my head accused as I slipped out of my own apartment. I spent the day in a downtown hotel room, ignoring messages from both Melanie and my social circle. By evening, guilt had morphed into panic. What had I done? Our perfect friendship was now messy with emotions and expectations. Worse, I couldn't stop thinking about her touch, her taste, the sounds she made. When I finally returned home after dark, Melanie was gone. Only a brief note remained. Got called for an emergency flight to London. We should talk when I'm back. M. Relief and disappointment battled within me. The reprieve gave me time to think, to regain my footing in a world suddenly tilted on its axis. Days passed with minimal communication. Her texts were cordial but distant, updates on her location, nothing about what had happened between us. I responded in kind, grateful for the emotional breathing room yet uneasy about the growing distance. 2 weeks later, my assistant mentioned casually, "Your flight attendant friend was on the society page sidebar. Something about serving celebrities at that charity gala in Paris." I checked online immediately. There she was, looking stunning in her uniform, smiling professionally beside a famous actor. The caption noted she was personally requested by several VIPs for international flights. I called her that night but got voicemail. My message was deliberately casual, "Saw your brush with fame. Call me when you're back in town?" She didn't. Instead, her schedule suddenly became impossibly busy. According to her brief texts, she was picking up extra shifts, flying routes she normally avoided. Singapore, Sydney, Johannesburg, always as far from Chandler as possible. I threw myself into foundation work, attending every gala and fundraiser on the calendar. At night, I'd stare at the copy of Midnight in Manhattan on my bedside table, remembering how this all began. 3 weeks after our night together, I called her airline, pulling strings to learn her schedule. The customer service representative reluctantly revealed, "Ms. Turner has switched to exclusively international long-haul flights for the foreseeable future." She was running, just as I had that morning. The realization brought a strange clarity. We were mirror images, both terrified of what was happening between us, both choosing flight over confrontation. I was composing a more direct message to her when my doorman called up. "Miss Phillips, there's a courier here with a package requiring your signature." 10 minutes later, I was staring at another cream-colored envelope bearing the same elegant handwriting. James Harrison's second letter had arrived exactly 1 month after the first, as promised. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet containing only one sentence: "Stop running from what you know is true." I sat heavily on my sofa, the simple message hitting like a physical blow. How could Harrison have anticipated this? Had he somehow known we would come together only to immediately pull apart? My phone rang. "Melanie," I answered breathlessly. "Did you get it?" she asked without preamble. "The letter?" "Just now. Mine was delivered to me in the Singapore crew lounge." Her voice sounded thin, tired. "Same message?" "Yes. Stop running from what you know is true." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "I've been taking every flight assignment available," she finally confessed. "Extended layovers, difficult routes, anything to stay in the air." I noticed. "I'm scared, Ruby." The vulnerability in her admission broke something loose in my chest. Of what happened between us. Of how much I wanted it to happen again. Her voice cracked slightly. Of how easy it would be to reshape my entire life around you. I closed my eyes, relief flooding through me. I've been scared too. That's why I left that morning. So, we're both cowards. Apparently. Another silence, more comfortable this time. "I'm landing in Chandler tomorrow," she said. 3-day break before Tokyo. My heart quickened. "Will you come over? Is that what you want?" I thought about Harrison's cryptic meddling, about fate and connection, and the invisible threads that had somehow brought Melanie into my life. "Yes," I said with newfound certainty. "That's exactly what I want." The whispers started at the Westfield charity luncheon. I was discussing donation allocations when I overheard Diane Holloway, Chandler's most notorious gossip, speaking in that theatrical whisper designed to be overheard. "Ruby Phillips and that flight attendant," she was saying to Catherine Marsh. "They've become quite inseparable, haven't they?" Catherine's eyebrows arched. "I saw them at the funeral for that investor, looking rather cozy." "Phillips' money associating with the service industry," Diane replied. "Her grandmother would be horrified." I maintained my composure, continuing my conversation about literacy initiatives while pretending I hadn't heard. But the words burrowed under my skin, festering there. Later that week, I received a pointed email from the Phillips Foundation board, reminding me that as a family representative, my personal associations reflect on our collective reputation. The message didn't mention Melanie specifically, but the implication was clear. I deleted it without responding. When Melanie returned from her Tokyo flight, I didn't mention the whispers or the email. Instead, we spent our 3-day break in a bubble of our own making, cooking elaborate meals in my kitchen, watching classic films with commentary that made us laugh until our sides hurt, and exploring this new physical dimension of our relationship with increasing confidence. On her last evening before departing for another international route, I finally broached the subject. "People are talking about us," I said, as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. Melanie's expression remained neutral. "What are they saying?" "Nothing directly, just implications. Questions about your background, why we're spending time together. Does it bother you?" She studied me carefully. I hesitated. "Not for the reasons you might think. I don't care what they think about you or us. I care that they think they have the right to an opinion at all." She nodded slowly, taking another sip of wine. "That's the difference between our worlds, Ruby. Nobody cares who I associate with." "Lucky you," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But," she continued, "my crew coordinator pulled me aside last week. Apparently some first-class passengers specifically requested me because they wanted gossip about the Phillips heiress." I shut it down immediately. Anger flared inside me. This is exactly why I hate Chandler sometimes. Everyone thinks they own a piece of me. "We could just," she hesitated, "maybe cool things down publicly, for a while?" The suggestion stung more than I expected. "Is that what you want?" "No," she said firmly. "But I don't want to make things harder for you either." I reached for her hand across the table. "I spent 32 years living by Chandler's rules. I'm done with that." Her smile was worth any amount of gossip. When she left for her flight the next morning, I felt a hollow space open inside me, a Melanie-shaped absence I hadn't experienced before we crossed the line from friendship to more. It scared me how quickly she'd become essential. 3 days later, I received a text from Jake, my oldest friend and chosen family. "What's this I hear about you dating a flight attendant? And why am I hearing it from Caroline Winthrop instead of you?" I called him immediately. "It's complicated." "It always is with you," he laughed. "But seriously, you've been dodging social events for months. Everyone's noticed." "I've been busy." "Ruby, come on. You're avoiding returning calls from people you've known your whole life. What's going on?" I sighed. "I'm figuring some things out." "Is this about your sexuality? Because if so, that's hardly shocking news in 2023. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he said gently. "But whatever's happening, don't keep disappearing. You don't have to face Chandler's judgment alone." His support meant everything, but he was right. I had been avoiding my normal social circles, creating a protective bubble around Melanie and me. It couldn't last forever. The perfect test came a week later, the Chandler Modern Art Gallery opening. As a major donor, my presence was expected. Melanie would be back from her Hong Kong route that afternoon. "Come with me," I suggested during our nightly call. "It's time we stopped hiding." Her hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Are you sure? Your crowd can be intimidating." "They're worse when they sense fear," I joked. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful. I'll handle the rest." The night of the gallery opening, Melanie arrived at my apartment wearing a sleek black dress that perfectly bridged the gap between sophistication and approachability. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup subtle but flawless. "You look stunning," I said, suddenly nervous about what I was asking her to face. The gallery was already crowded when we arrived. I felt heads turn, conversations pause as we entered together. Chin high, I guided Melanie through the room, introducing her deliberately to key figures in Chandler's social hierarchy. Most were politely curious. A few were warmly welcoming. Several, notably Diane and her coterie, were icily formal. "Your foundation's new charity case?" Diane whispered when Melanie stepped away briefly to examine a sculpture. "Careful, Diane," I replied quietly. "Your insecurity is showing." As the evening progressed, the pressure of performative socializing became suffocating. I found Melanie in a quiet corner, studying a large abstract canvas. "Need some air?" I asked. She nodded gratefully. We slipped into a private alcove near the emergency exit, momentarily hidden from prying eyes. "You've been amazing tonight," I said, reaching for her hand. "Your world is exhausting," she admitted. "How do you do this all the time?" Instead of answering, I kissed her. Not the polite peck of greeting I'd been giving acquaintances all evening, but a desperate, hungry kiss that expressed everything I couldn't say with words. She responded immediately, pressing me against the wall, her hands tangling in my hair. When we finally broke apart, breathless, I noticed Diane standing at the entrance to our alcove, eyes wide with scandalized delight at having caught us. I simply smiled at her as Melanie and I walked past, hand in hand, no longer concerned with whispers or reputations or anything beyond the woman beside me. Summer arrived in Chandler with vengeance, blistering heat and violent thunderstorms that seemed to mirror the tumultuous progression of my relationship with Melanie. After the gallery incident, we'd officially stopped pretending we were just friends. The Phillips Foundation board had sent a carefully worded letter expressing concern about recent publicity, which I'd promptly used as kindling for my fireplace. Tonight's storm was particularly ferocious. Lightning illuminated my apartment in strobe-like flashes as rain lashed against the windows. I was alone, nursing a glass of wine and trying not to think about Melanie's flight to Barcelona, scheduled to depart 4 hours ago. My phone rang. It was her. "All flights grounded," she said without preamble. "Worst storm system in years." "Where are you?" I asked, heart quickening. "Downstairs. Lobby security won't let me up without your approval since I'm not on your permanent list." I immediately called down my authorization, then paced nervously while waiting for the elevator to deliver her. We hadn't parted on the best terms 3 days ago. A stupid argument about competing priorities. My charity gala versus her rare weekend off. Neither of us had been willing to compromise. When my doorbell rang, I opened it to find Melanie drenched, her uniform clinging to her body, hair plastered against her face. She looked beautiful and furious. "Your doorman made me wait while he triple-checked your approval," she said, stepping inside and dropping her flight bag with a thud. "I'll speak to building management." "Don't bother. It's not about the doorman." I knew exactly what she meant. It was about everything. The constant reminders that I belonged to Chandler's elite while she was perpetually treated as an outsider. "We need to talk," she said, peeling off her soaked blazer. "Let me get you a towel first." "No," she insisted. "I've been practicing this speech for 3 hours at the airport, and if I don't say it now, I never will." My stomach dropped. This was it, the inevitable ending I'd been dreading since we first crossed the line from friendship to more. "I can't keep doing this, Ruby," she began, confirming my fears. "This back and forth, this pretending that our worlds aren't fundamentally incompatible." "They're not incompatible," I protested. "We've been making it work." "Have we?" Lightning flashed, illuminating the determination in her eyes. "I'm tired of being your secret, then your statement, then your afterthought when your real life gets busy. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my schedule before planning an event you needed me to attend?" She was right, and we both knew it. I'd been navigating our relationship on my terms, expecting her to slot into my life when convenient. "I've been selfish," I admitted quietly. "We both have," she sighed. "I took that Barcelona flight because I was angry at you, not because I needed to." Thunder cracked directly overhead, making us both jump. "So, what are you saying?" I asked, afraid of her answer. Before she could respond, my phone rang. Robert Coleman, James Harrison's attorney, at nearly midnight during a record-breaking storm. I hesitated, then answered on speakerphone. "Miss Phillips, forgive the late hour. I've been trying to reach you both. Is Miss Turner with you by chance?" Melanie stepped closer. "I'm here." "Excellent. There's been an urgent development regarding Mr. Harrison's estate. Your presence is required at my office as soon as travel is safe. I've been instructed to give you something." We exchanged puzzled glances. "What is it?" I asked. "A final message and, well, it's better explained in person. Please come tomorrow morning." After he hung up, the apartment fell silent except for the rain. Our argument suddenly seemed less important in the face of this mysterious summons. "Do you think it's another letter?" Melanie asked. "Probably, though the timing is strange." She nodded, looking exhausted and vulnerable in her damp clothes. I handed her a towel and some dry clothes, calling a temporary truce. Morning came with clearing skies. We arrived at Coleman's office still wary of each other but united in curiosity. The attorney greeted us with unusual solemnity. "Mr. Harrison left specific instructions that this final package be delivered only after certain conditions were met," he explained, placing a large envelope on his desk. namely that you two would experience a significant relationship challenge approximately 3 months after his first letter. Melanie and I exchanged uncomfortable glances. How could he possibly have predicted our argument? Inside, you'll find his final communication and documentation regarding a property he's left to both of you jointly. Property? I repeated, stunned. Coleman handed me the envelope. Inside was a photograph of a modest coastal cottage, along with a deed bearing both our names. The accompanying letter was shorter than previous ones. Dear Ruby and Melanie, I read aloud. My final gift is this, perspective. Enclosed is a photograph I've carried for 40 years. Perhaps it will help you understand why I've taken such interest in your connection. I pulled out an old black and white photograph. It showed a much younger James Harrison standing between two women. I didn't recognize either until Melanie gasped. That's my mother, she said, pointing to the woman on the left. I stared harder at the other woman and felt the room tilt. And that's my Aunt Catherine. The letter concluded, some connections transcend boundaries, but require courage to nurture. The cottage is where Catherine and Eleanor's story began, and where it might have continued, had they made different choices. Don't repeat their mistake. With affection, James. We left Coleman's office in stunned silence, the deed and photographs clutched in my hand, the weight of Harrison's revelation pressing down on us. Our mother's friends, Melanie finally said as we sat in my car. All this time? He wasn't playing matchmaker, I realized. He was trying to set something right from the past. Chandler's winter gala season had arrived, bringing with it the familiar parade of designer gowns and strategic philanthropy. This year, however, something was different. I stood before my full-length mirror, adjusting the emerald pendant at my throat, my grandmother's, worn for generations by Phillips women at significant moments. Tonight was certainly significant. After 6 months of weekends at Harrison's coastal cottage, of difficult conversations and beautiful reconciliations, Melanie and I had made decisions that would permanently alter both our lives. My phone buzzed with a text. Lobby in 5. You ready for this? I smiled, typing back, born ready. The annual Phillips Foundation Winter Gala was Chandler's premier social event. As I entered the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel with Melanie on my arm, conversation stuttered and resumed at a slightly higher pitch. She looked stunning in a midnight blue gown that made her eyes seem even more intensely blue. They're staring, she whispered. Let them, I replied, squeezing her hand. You're worth staring at. We moved through the crowd, stopping for obligatory greetings. Diane Holloway practically sprained her neck trying to overhear our conversation with the mayor. I introduced Melanie not as my friend or associate, but simply by her name, letting others draw their conclusions. Ruby Phillips actually brought a date to her own foundation gala, I overheard someone whisper. And it's that flight attendant from the gallery opening. I smiled, unbothered. The cottage had changed us both, me perhaps more than Melanie. Something about the simple structure by the sea, with its weathered shingles and creaking floorboards, had stripped away pretensions I'd carried my entire life. During my welcome speech, I made the announcement that had been months in planning. The Phillips Foundation is expanding its mission to include transportation scholarships for disadvantaged youth, I said into the microphone. Inspired by my partner Melanie Turner, we will help young people literally reach new heights through aviation education. Melanie's expression of surprised joy was worth every raised eyebrow in the room. Later, as we danced beneath crystal chandeliers, she whispered, Partner, huh? That's the first time you've used that word publicly. Get used to it, I replied. I plan to use it for a very long time. 3 days after the gala, we returned to the cottage for the weekend. The seaside retreat had become our sanctuary, a place where neither of us was socialite or flight attendant, just Ruby and Melanie. I have news, she said as we walked along the shore collecting shells. I accepted the airline's management offer. I'll be training new flight attendants here in Chandler. My heart leapt. You're grounding yourself? For good? She nodded. I'll still fly occasionally, but no more 3-day disappearances to Singapore. What changed your mind? I asked, though I suspected the answer. James Harrison, she said simply. That photograph of my mother and your aunt. I keep thinking about their choices, how they let circumstances separate them. We had pieced together the story from old letters we'd found in the cottage and conversations with my Aunt Catherine before she passed. She and Eleanor, Melanie's mother, had been more than friends in their youth, but had separated when life pulled them in different directions. James had been their mutual friend, watching as both women married men they didn't love and lived lives of quiet regret. "I don't want that," Melanie continued. "I don't want to wonder what if, 40 years from now." We reached the small bookshop at the edge of the beach town, our favorite Saturday ritual. Inside, it reminded us of Maple Avenue books where our story began. Between mystery and romance sections, I pulled Melanie close, kissing her softly. "Remember our first meeting, fighting over that book? Best argument I ever had," she laughed. We each selected a new novel, and I watched as Melanie inscribed the inside cover of hers before handing it to me, to more chapters together. "All my love, M." I wrote in mine, "Turn the page with me forever," before passing it to her. The bookshop owner smiled knowingly at our exchange. "You two remind me of another couple who used to exchange books here years ago," she said. "They'd leave notes for each other in the margins." We shared a look, wondering if she meant Eleanor and Catherine. On our last evening at the cottage, as sunset painted the ocean in shades of amber and rose, I brought out the final item from James Harrison's package, a small wooden box we'd been afraid to open. Inside was a simple note, "For when you're ready," and 2 vintage rings. "They were theirs," I said quietly. "What they never gave each other." Melanie touched one gently. "And he saved them all these years." I took her hand, suddenly certain. "I don't need their rings, but I do need you. Marry me, Melanie. Not because James orchestrated it or because of our mother's friends, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." She pulled me close, happiness radiating from her face. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." As darkness fell, we sat on the porch of the cottage that had changed everything, watching stars emerge over the ocean. The invisible threads James Harrison had seen between us had woven themselves into something unbreakable, a connection that transcended the bookstore, the funeral, and all the boundaries we'd once thought insurmountable. I thought of that first shared book and all the chapters that had followed, some difficult, some beautiful, all part of a story neither of us could have written alone.